Welcome. Today I'm going to show you guys how to play Islebound. Now this is a very big game, and so because it's a big game, it's really hard to really get the whole game in the camera. So we're going to explain this game in several different segments. Now let's first talk about the objective of the game. The objective of the game is to build a nation. And in your nation, well, you need buildings in a nation, right? And so, with that said, you're going to definitely want to be building buildings in your nation. And there are all sorts of buildings that you could possibly build. A butcher, a market, a bank, net makers, school of war, trade office, serpent breeders. So there's quite a few buildings. You will not play with all these buildings in a game. You will not have access to them all. Unless maybe perhaps you're playing, even if you were playing a 4-player game, I don't think you would completely see every single building that is available in this game. Each of these buildings have a whole bunch of different abilities that they do. Some will give you extra points at the end of the game, but most of them will just give you abilities to help you during the course of the game. So, anyways, with that said, you want to build buildings in your town. And the way the game will end is if you are playing a 2 or 3-player game, the first player who manages to build 8 of these buildings in their town wins the game. Well, doesn't win the game, but they end the game. Okay? And then it's whoever has the most renown that will have won. So that's basically the victor points in this game. Is renown. And these buildings each are worth renown. You build a building, some might be just simply worth 2 renown. You might get some that are worth a whole lot more renown too. Like the palace here is 13 renown. So that's a lot more than 2 renown. So, you might build a bunch of buildings, but you might even in fact be the first player to build 8 buildings. But if one of the other players didn't build nearly as many as you because they kept going for the really high buildings, they might still beat you because it's the player who has the most renown at the end of the game that wins, not the player who builds 8 buildings first. And then after, that just triggers the end of the game. So it doesn't completely end it. So it just triggers it. So after you go and you have built 8 buildings in your turn, if there is still some players playing who didn't get a turn for that round, they will all get their turn for that round. But then there will be one more round, meaning if you're the player that got 8 buildings, you're going to get one more turn. So that's really cool. So maybe you might build more than 8 buildings. Maybe you'll build 9. Who knows? Now, I say build, and that is one of the ways you can get these buildings, is you can build them. But you can also buy these buildings. So, when you buy a building, you're going to have to pay coin. Okay? Everybody's going to start with a certain amount of coin. So it's possible you could buy yourself a building right in the beginning of the game. It's possible. You might have to use almost all of your money to do so, but it is possible you could build, or should I say buy a building right away. However, if you build a building, you're going to need resources to build the building. And so, for instance, if you want to build the butcher here, you're going to need 2 wood, and you're going to need 2 fish. But that's not all. You also need to be on a special isle. So there's a special island, or isle, over here, called, you can barely see it, it's this one here called Stratic. If you look just barely, you can see that it's got the hammer on it, and so do all of these cards. They have the hammer on it. So you need to be visiting, or you have to be owning that island, one or the other, and if you own the island, you're still visiting it. If it's somebody else's island that's under their control, you're still visiting it. So you have to be there in order to build a building with the resources that you have collected. So that's one of the things you can do with your resources in this game, is you can use them to build buildings. But there are lots of other uses you can use these resources for too. a whole bunch of the options that you can possibly do. But basically, that's what you want to do to is build a whole bunch of buildings and get tons of renown to do it. And there's lots of other ways to get renown, not just simply building buildings. But in order to be able to obviously get the resources to build these buildings, or to get the money in order to actually buy these buildings, you're going to have to go around to a lot of the different many isles, visiting them, attacking them, or using diplomacy even to get tons of money, to get tons of resources, so that way you can be the first player to, build 8 buildings. So that's going to be the majority of the game, is going around to all these different isles. Okay? So, each player will start at a particular port. There are 4 ports in this game. So basically all 4 corners of this game. So this corner, that aisle up there, that aisle up there. Each of these 4 aisles here are a port. Each player is going to get a boat. So they're going to get something like this. And there's 4 different colors to choose from. Manta's yellow and I'm green for this demonstration. So this is me. I'm green. So each player will start at the port. That's another thing. Each player will then put a cube of their color next to this little banner here in the number of 12 in the red. Okay? There's some significance to that banner with the number. And you'll notice that some of these aisles also have those red banners, but some of them have blue, and even that one up there has both. So there's a lot of significance to that, of course, and we'll get to that shortly. But each player is going to start at a port of their choice. You can pick your favorite one. Each of these ports do a different thing. So just like when you visit an aisle, it's going to have all sorts of different types of things that's going to happen when you visit an aisle. Each aisle is different. So each aisle is going to have something that's almost completely different from the other aisle. And these ports are the same way. They are not the same. So each port will have a different advantage, a different ability, if you will. But when you start at a port, you are not allowed to visit the location you're starting at. So the thing about this game is the first thing you always must do on your turn, the first thing, is you must move your ship. Your ship isn't allowed to stay where it is. It has to move. It has to at least move 1 space. Now, each player is going to get a player board here. And on this player board, there is these little wave symbols and numbers. Everybody will start with just the 2 wave symbols, meaning they can move their boat a whole 2 spaces, basically. They can move their boat 2 spaces. Now, there are ways of increasing that number and other various ways to do so as well. And we can talk about that right now, in fact. Okay? So, I told you that you can use fish and wood to build buildings, right? Well, fish has another use. And I'm not saying that it doesn't have more than 2 uses, but we'll go over that next use. If you have fish in your ship, and when you place your wood, and when you place your fish, you will place it on the player board at this spot here. So here's your ship, okay? This area here is for placing wood and fish, and you're only allowed to have 10 max. No, that doesn't mean you're allowed to have 10 wood and 10 fish. You can only have 10 of the 2 of these resources max. So maybe 5 fish, 5 wood, 6 fish, 4 wood. It's up to you. But that's the amount you can have max. And whenever you get resources and you're already at your limit, you can discard whatever ones you want if you want to. So like, let's say you had, 6 fish and 4 wood, and you get some more wood. You would like to get that wood. Well, you can discard another fish and replace it with the wood if you want to. It's up to you. But that's your limit, is 10. So you definitely want to utilize these. If you can't use these to build buildings, because after all, you're on this side of the board, and the aisle's over there, and you have tons of resources, and you're getting close to 10, well, there are other ways of using resources, but for instance, you could use a fish to move another space. So if you wanted to get to, okay, let's just do a demonstration here. Here's Marhaven, okay? This boat can move a maximum of 2 spaces currently. So I could move maybe to this isle here called Farwood, which you can't really see. We will bring up the board pieces so you can see them better later. But that's the maximum that this ship would be able to move. However, if I had a fish on board here, I could spend the fish to then move to, I don't know, Rockslide, for instance. I could go all the way up there. So, and I can spend as many fish as needed. So if I wanted to get even further away, I could spend another fish if I had it. So that's the second thing you can do with fish, is you can use fish to basically get around the board, obviously, faster and easier. And I did do that quite a bit when I played this game. I did use the fish here and then, every so often. So that's another thing you can do. So the first thing you'll always do is you'll move. So we established that. You always must move first. Now, after you move, then you can take one of 4 actions. You can visit the isle that you've moved to. You can attack it. You can use diplomacy. And you can hunt for treasure. Now, every player is going to start with treasure in the beginning of the game, a certain amount. And if you are completely out of money and you are visiting an isle that isn't yours or is owned by an opponent, well, if it's owned by an opponent and you cannot pay the tax, basically, for visiting that isle, you cannot go there, okay? So that's something to note. If you go here to Underwall and it's not owned by anybody, it's not owned by your opponents, then you can still visit this island. If you do not have the money to pay for it, there is only one action you can take here, unless, of course, you're going to attack it. If you attack it, you do not have to pay this fee here. But if you fail your attack, then you get nothing for the trouble, basically. So you won't, in a sense, be visiting the isle. You have almost, in a sense, wasted your turn if you are not able to attack it. Now, some isles cannot be attacked. So, for instance, Underwall here, it has a blue banner on it. You can only use diplomacy on this isle. You can't attack it. And so, therefore, the only action, if you had no money, so let me show you the money. If you had none of these, which this is the money, if you had none of these at all in your inventory, then the only action you could take here, because no one owns it, and you certainly don't, is the hunt for treasure action, okay? Now, the hunt for treasure action is pretty simple. There is a little treasure map and on this player board that is over right here, which you can't really see in this picture right at this moment. So let's sort of see if we can bring it up. Okay, you're going to get whatever money is currently sitting on the treasure map. Maybe there's just one there, and so maybe that's all you'll get is just one money for doing the hunt for treasure. But there could be more. So here's 2 more. So if you do the hunt for treasure action, and you don't have to do the hunt for treasure action if you're, like, for instance, you can take the action hunt for treasure if you want to at any point in the game. You don't have to do it when you're poor, okay? You can just do it whenever. But then that's your action, and you won't be visiting the island if you do that. But maybe it's worth it because you get 3 money. So that's what you would do. You get to take off all of the money off of the treasure map. Now you're probably wondering, how does money get to the treasure map? Okay, well, let's explain that in a sec. Now, if there is no money on the treasure map, then you'll just get a coin from the supply. Okay, so you'll just get 1 coin from the supply if there's never any money on this treasure map. Now, when does money come here to the treasure map? Normally, when you use money, you would probably think that money will just go back to the supply. And usually it does. In most games, money just goes back to the supply when you use it for something, right? In this game, if you visit an isle that isn't occupied by a player, you will pay the tax of 1 coin, for instance, for this isle in particular, you'll pay it to the treasure map, but only when you use it to visit, okay? If it's owned by a player, though, so like for instance, if Meta here controlled Underwall, meaning he used diplomacy to take over it, then I would have to pay him the coin to visit this location. So that's something to note, that if you own a whole bunch of isles, you're going to be paying your opponent a bunch of money. So you're helping them out by visiting these locations. So you obviously will want to use your influence, which is diplomacy, or you'll want to basically be doing a lot of attacking. Now, some isles can only be attacked. Sun's Rest here can't be used with diplomacy. You must attack it, okay? So that's some of the actions you can take. You can visit, you can attack, you can use diplomacy, and you can hunt for treasure. But there's also free actions that you may take on your turn. And there's two of them, in fact. There's buy buildings, and then there's the events. You'll notice there are round discs on two of these islands, one on Rockslide and one over here on Zillim. Those are events. If you manage to complete an event, and there are events on this big board over here, if you manage to complete an event, but when you visit that isle, that's basically counts as a free action. So that's really interesting. Another really interesting thing is after you move, you are then allowed to do the actions in any order you want. You can, for instance, do a free action first, and then either visit, attack, or use diplomacy. And then after you do that, you can do another free action. In fact, you can do as many free actions as you possibly can do on your turn. There is no limit to the amount. The only limit will you be able to actually complete the event, or will you have enough money to buy a building? So meaning you could probably buy a bunch of buildings if you had a ton of money, or if they were just really cheap buildings. So that's something to note. And that can be very handy at times. There are some times that free actions won't work until after you visit the island, and sometimes you'll be able to only be able to do certain free actions before you do the main action. So there are definitely some advantages to being allowed to do free actions and one action of your choice in any order you want. There is definitely some advantages to that. Now, we will talk about attacking and diplomacy in separate videos because there's a lot going on with these two functions as well. And then in a separate video, we will talk about what you get actually when you visit these isles, what you're going to get for it as well when you visit each of these isles. We'll talk about each isle in general, okay, in the next videos.